welcome back to AP World History.
It's been a long time.
Another big question for you guys right now.
How am I doing? I'm doing all right.
Schedule at least, with presentations coming up, and we are going to be looking at the prelude and the beginning of the French Revolution. So right now, we are going to be taking a look at the build-up. Now, this is political and social revolutions, and the French Revolution is the first one we're going to look at. Actually, it's the second one we're going to look at. The first one we're going to look at is the American Revolution, but we're just going to give a really big overview today, or right now, of the American Revolution as a precursor to the French Revolution. Now, we've got to go way back to the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment is where we're getting away from church doctrine, where we're getting away from some of this classical ideology, and we're starting to look on rational analysis, scientific analysis, logic, reasoning. Those are the main aspects of the Enlightenment. We've already done a little bit of work on the Enlightenment, so you should be somewhat familiar with this. It will have an impact on the French Revolution. Now, one of the things the Enlightenment thinkers really focused on were these things called natural laws. Natural laws are just these universal laws that govern human nature. They're trying to figure out scientifically, rationally, why we act the way we do. The issue with that is these philosophers, or philosophes as they're commonly known, these philosophes didn't agree. So the Enlightenment has a lot of different characters popping in and out with their own ideologies. We're not going to get into all those characters. We'll get into some, but not a lot. The ones that will have an influence on the American Revolution and later the French Revolution, a tangible, noticeable influence. Two of the earliest, Thomas Hobbes and John Locke, which we've already talked about some. We've got this idea of a social contract theory. Now, the social contract theory is just the idea that subconsciously we all agree to give up certain rights in order to maintain an organized society. The organized society will be maintained because if we give up certain rights, that means that we are actually, in turn, protecting ourselves. I give up the right to steal from you. I protect myself, theoretically, from people stealing from me. Now, another idea that came out of this was natural rights. Just because you're born as a human being, you have certain rights that belong to all humans. And as John Locke said, they are life, liberty, and property. You're going to see that come up in the American Revolution with the idea of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, which is a direct connection to John Locke. Now, these philosophes, one of the things that they look at is social order, how things are set up, specifically in Europe and through much of the time in France. Now, one of the things they express is this idea that we should have a freedom of thought and a freedom of expression. The freedom of thought and expression is not something that was embraced by European monarchs. They definitely had an idea that censorship was the way to go. Censorship is the way to preserve order. And thought and expression, freedom of thought and expression at least, was a major thing that these philosophes pushed for. Now, as far as religion goes, they weren't anti-religion. In fact, many of them were quite religious, but some of them were espousing this view called deism. Now, deism is the idea that, yes, God is in charge, but God is more like a watchmaker. He made the earth, and he just set it spinning, and doesn't play a major role in the everyday lives of human beings. That's a lot different than common religious thought at the time. These philosophes also were looking at new forms of government, or the best forms of government. One of the main figures of this that you all are probably familiar with, if not his name, his ideas, Baron de Montesquieu of France. He favors a checks and balances system, which is going to be replicated in the American Constitution. The checks and balances system is something that enabled or kept one government part, one specific aspect of government from becoming way too powerful by literally having a balancing or a checking characteristic of government that can limit the powers. This separation of powers is going to be a key idea going forward. Interestingly enough, in the arts, this idea of the Enlightenment is shown through a lot of artwork, actually. Some of it propaganda, political cartoons. Others, more of the fine art that we think of that would be hanging in museums. One of the artists that was really significant here was a guy named Joseph Wright. Joseph Wright is an English artist, and in 1768, he's gonna create this work called An Experiment on a Bird in the Air Pump. Take a look at this. I want you to notice this use of light and shadow for drama. The light and shadow adds so much dramatic effect to an already dramatic scene. Look at the faces and the expressions of the people, and including the expression of the scientist in the middle. Now, we have an interesting lighting source. That lighting source is coming from underneath, and in this instance, you can think of the lighting source as literally enlightenment. And if you look at the faces of the people are lit up. Look at the children. The children, in fact, are the ones who are most enlightened by this early form of Enlightenment education and Enlightenment knowledge. Now, what's actually happening in the scene is that all the air was pumped out of a vacuum in which a bird was seated, and that bird then passed out. Everybody thought the bird was dead. The oxygen is put back into the vacuum, and the scientist magically resurrects the bird to everyone's astonishment. A really cool image that encapsulates a lot of what Enlightenment thinking was about. Now, culturally, we have some developments during the Enlightenment period. One of those is going to be the middle class. We're going to call those the bourgeoisie right now. Bourgeoisie, it's a term for the middle class, for an educated class, a class that is really going to be your professionals, your doctors, lawyers, wealthy merchants, the educated elite of the common people, I suppose you could say. This is a major change because in the past we didn't have a very large bourgeoisie. During this era, a lot of population growth combined with some redistribution of wealth has created a much larger middle class and much more opportunities for education and much more opportunity for doing something as a vocation rather than a common worker or as farm labor. Now, these bourgeoisie have virtually no power, at least in France, no political power. They are seeking this. The bourgeoisie, as I said, are really going to be quite educated. Now, the upper classes were educated as well. That's not going to be a change. What does change, though, is the discussion. And in France, we start to have these things called salons. Salons are formal gatherings of people to listen to a lecture on a topic. They are going to discuss the current events. They are going to discuss some thorny social problem. And they're held in people's homes. Now, what's interesting about this is that it's the women who play a major role. Women are going to be the ones who help sponsor these salons. They're going to be the hosts in the salons. So now women are taking a major role in discussions that have to do with Enlightenment thinking. That's a major change. That is something that we're not going to see fulfilled in the French Revolution. Women do not gain really anything during the French Revolution, except in the time of Napoleon, which they gained some formal rights, but then again, some rights are going to be taken away. It's a very mixed bag, but overall, the promises of the revolution are not going to be something that women are going to see. Coming up next, we're going to see actual conflict. This is going to pop out in the Americas, specifically with the American Revolution. But before we get to the American Revolution, we're going to talk about the 7 Years' War, which is like a global war, essentially, between Britain and France. And our little part of it is going to be known as the French and Indian War. So I will see you again on our next our next episode, I suppose.